Welcome to the Tower Yoga Podcast, where we dive deep into the heart of yoga and community. Come along with us as we explore the transformative power of yoga, share insights, and inspire one another on this journey of life. I'm Kellee Williams, and I'm your host and the co-founder of Tower Yoga. Thank you for joining our yoga community. Hello, and welcome into another episode of the podcast. Today is all around books. That's what this episode is about. It's been a very bookish month at Tower Yoga. Started off with Lit Hop a few weeks back, and then Lee Herrick's book launch last week. And I was just clearing out my shelves and putting books aside for the book swap happening this Sunday, the 27th, in the Lotus Room. And directly after the book swap is a Harry Potter themed yoga class taught by Farron. So very, very bookish. So this is where the inspiration was coming from. I was also thinking about how many times people ask me for book recommendations, and I almost get overwhelmed because there's so many. So I thought, okay, well, why don't I just choose 2 or 3 and make it kind of like a segment on the podcast, and I'll, make some recommendations on the podcast, and the next time someone asks me, I'll say, listen to this podcast, and maybe eventually we'll have several stacked up, and then people can just dig into their heart's content. So here we go. I have 3 books chosen, and I'm not going to go through them in any specific order. And they're all on yoga, relating to asana and other things. But yeah, I'm kind of trying to keep a little bit of a theme. So we'll get started with one book that came out the same year I did my first training, and I don't think I read it that year it came out. I actually probably read it 2 or 3 years. It was required reading with a continuing education course I took, but I remember when this book came out because it sort of rocked the yoga world, and we'll get into why, but this book is called Yoga Body: The Origins of Modern Postural Practice, and that's by Mark Singleton. And it came on the scene, and it really opened up, I think, a lot of practitioners' eyes and minds to how we thought of the practice, specifically the physical asana practice. So the book sheds light on a common assumption that yoga, like I said, especially the physical practice we see today, has been passed down unchanged for thousands of years. But Singleton shows us something different, that modern yoga asana, while rooted in ancient tradition, of course, has evolved through complex cultural, historical, and even technological influences. So one of the core themes of Yoga Body is its challenge to the notion of an authentic yoga lineage. Singleton argues that yoga is more of an adaptable organism than a static artifact. So this book reveals that yoga's evolution mirrors personal growth, constantly adapting and shifting over time. It presents yoga as a practice deeply influenced by colonial history, global cultural exchange, modern innovation, things like that, all together, rather than simply an unchanged system handed down through the ages. So for practitioners, this book kind of provides a deeper understanding of certain practices like Iyengar, which we'll actually get into his book next, and Ashtanga. So Singleton encourages us to ask questions like, where do these practices come from, and how have they evolved to fit our modern time? So by exploring this, Singleton brings a level of scholarly depth to yoga practice that wasn't commonly accessible before. So this book didn't come without controversy. So some readers misinterpreted Singleton's research accusing him of diminishing yoga's Indian roots or portraying postures as like mere calisthenics or just gymnastics. However, he clarifies in his work that he is not dismissing the spiritual or cultural significance of yoga, but rather showing how it has evolved, influenced by various global forces over time. And I remember in my training, it was an Ashtanga Vinyasa, and we were learning about the kind of origins of Ashtanga, and it really surprised me when I learned that the practice was only around 100 years old. I was thrown off. Like, I thought every posture was just like thousands of years old. So by the time I got around to reading his book, I had like heard that it was a little kind of controversial, but also I had already sort of confronted that part of me that was like, what the hell? Like, Wild Thing isn't ancient, although it probably is, but you know what I mean. Um, but that was for some people who didn't know that, it, for whatever reasons, was kind of a hard pill to swallow. So, but anyways, I digress. What makes this book so powerful is that it bridges the gap between tradition and innovation. So it helps navigate to like a middle ground. Singleton doesn't argue that yoga is purely ancient or purely modern, but instead shows how it's a combination of both, constantly in motion, reshaping itself as it moves across borders and through time. As practitioners, we often seek authenticity and an unbroken lineage in our practice. But Singleton reminds us that the beauty of yoga lies not just in its past, but in its ongoing evolution. How each generation shapes it according to its needs and understanding, to the times. So he challenges us to rethink what we mean by authenticity and to embrace yoga as a living, breathing practice that reflects both personal and cultural growth. And I think that's really, really beautiful. I had teachers and mentors who were 10, 15, sometimes 20 years older than me, and certain things that were on my heart as a budding teacher, like shifting some languaging that I was hearing so that it could feel a little bit more, I don't know, current or inclusive. There's, different things like hands-on adjustments have changed a lot since I first started practicing. So much has changed, I think, for the better. And if there was never any room to adapt the practice to the times, then it would start to like cause more harm than be something that really helps so many people. In closing, this book offers us a more nuanced perspective on yoga's history and invites us to consider how this ancient practice continues to evolve in the modern world. So, for anyone who's deeply invested in understanding yoga beyond the mat, this book is a must read, in my opinion. It is a little dense, I will say, especially if you're not used to kind of more of that like scholarly approach on your yoga material, but it's something that you could dig into slowly, and you could even, let that spark your own research, certain things that you come across. Um, this book offers a lot of insights that challenge long held assumptions while honoring the dynamic nature of yoga itself. It's a really good one, in my opinion. That's why I'm recommending it. All right. So that gets me into, I mentioned Iyengar. This is another one when I was kind of asking for book recommendations that I heard out of almost every single yoga teacher's mouth, light on yoga from Iyengar. And I even heard people refer to it as like the Bible of yoga. And, I was like, okay. So I got into it, and it's very comprehensive. It has a lot of photos, and it has like meticulous step-by-step instructions. There, in every single book that I'm recommending, there's like pros and cons, there's solutions and problems. There's everything in there. Like, it's nuanced, speaking of nuance. So, take what you will. And if there's something that speaks to you that you like, great. If there's other things, like, yeah, like, think about that. Like, you know, challenge those things. And yeah, go deep in those directions and have conversations with friends and all those kinds of things. But um, I do want to highlight this book because it is definitely a classic. So it was published in 1966. It's considered a timeless classic in the yoga world. And it's not just a guide for practitioners, but it's a really insightful text that has been a big part in shaping how yoga is practiced globally today. So it's a comprehensive manual covering all aspects of yoga, from asana, the postures, to pranayama, breath control. It touches on philosophy behind the practice. Something that stands out is the level of detail, as I talked about, which also could be a little overwhelming for some. There's over 600 photographs in the book, and it's demonstrating the precise alignment and technique for each pose. Now, of course, from referencing back to Yoga Body, I love how now we can, of course, like, still learn and take away a lot from these kinds of texts, but it's cool to be able to see other body shapes and modifications and all those kinds of things in the newer manuals that have come today, and see if, like, we never allowed ourselves to adapt and change with the practice, we would only ever have this book and only ever just be able to see this one man who's really flexible and thin and, doing these postures that, I, like, literally can't even get into half of them, and I feel like I'm a pretty flexible person. So, yeah, but I guess I just kind of wanted to tie that in with the last book. That being said, nonetheless, it also, outside of being like a visual reference, which is can be helpful, and having those verbal cues and that kind of thing, he dives deeper into the layers of yoga. So he helps us understand it as zoomed out as like a bigger or larger spiritual practice. He explains the philosophy of yoga in a way that is pretty approachable. He offers translations and insights on key concepts from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And it's a reminder, when he goes into that philosophy, that yoga is not just about flexibility or strength. It's about cultivating a harmonious connection between body, mind, and spirit. Iyengar, had a lifelong dedication to the practice of yoga, and that really shines through and throughout the pages. His voice is authoritative yet compassionate. He does emphasize precision, very meticulous, but also encourages students to approach the practice with patience and consistency, knowing that, this stuff takes time. So for anyone who's serious about, their practice and is really like wanting more of a kind of a manual that covers a lot of bases, this is a classic guide for sure. And the next book that I want to share is also more of a manual. It's called Asana, Pranayama, Mudra, Banda. And this is another one that was recommended to me early on when I first started teaching. This might have actually even been gifted to me from one of my yoga teachers. And if I remember correctly, she was definitely like, every single yoga teacher should have this book. And I think it was originally published in 1969. So it's also another one that's been around for a very, very long time. This was written by Swami Satyananda Saraswati, and it's got this like iconic cover. It's orange, has like a very 70s look. They haven't updated it, and I love that. With someone in Matsyendrasana, probably, or some twisty seated posture like that. And this book really overwhelmed me when I first received it, but I was really excited about it. And this is one that I have just slowly, have slowly taken in over more than a decade. And it, hands down, is like one of my go-to texts, like creating curriculum with teacher training. I reference this book a lot. So this book has stood the test of time. It's still highly recommended by yoga teachers and students around the world. One of the biggest strengths of this book is its detailed step-by-step instructions. So Saraswati doesn't just tell you how to perform each asana or pranayama technique. He breaks down the mechanics, benefits, and even contraindications for each practice, making it both accessible and also deeply informative. Something that I really love about the book is its structured approach. So each section focuses on a specific area. So there's the asanas, the postures, there's the pranayama, the breath controller techniques, the mudras, the gestures, and the bandas, the energy locks. And this makes it easy to find what you need, and like it is more like a reference guide. Like you can quickly reference things based on how it's structured, and I love that. It makes it really easy to find what you need, whether you're a beginner working on, the foundation of your practice and your postures, or a more advanced yogi that's putting together a teacher training. So one point that resonates with not only me, but a lot of people is that the book blends tradition with practicality. And what I mean by that is it's not just a list of postures, it includes the philosophical context and the subtle aspects of yoga that are often overlooked in modern classes. So there's a deep respect for yoga's spiritual roots, which I think can be something that is lacking or gets missed in some of the newer books that we see today. So in particular, the sections on pranayama and bandhas stand out. Those by far are the sections that I reference the most in this book myself. The detailed explanations of the breath work and the internal energy techniques are chef's kiss. If you've ever struggled to understand how to apply pranayama or felt confused by the mechanics of energy locks, this book offers clarity that can transform your practice. The energy locks are also like I kind of talk on Padabanda, like the foot locks, or Hastabanda, the hand locks. I even getting into like Mula Banda, the like root chakra locks. In a 1 hour like group class where you're just going, it can take, especially when you're like teaching an all levels class and there's so many different people, level of experiences, it can be hard to kind of get into the nitty gritty there. And so this is really cool. And not just, I think, like to practice on your own, but then even when you come into group classes, these are locks that you can practice throughout. Once you learn in your own body what those are, you can explore that in your practice. And it's just something that's like a really cool addition that could be beneficial to you kind of seeking out on your own, because it's challenging for us as teachers to get all that in especially if we're teaching large classes to lots of different people, new and all the things. So that's a really cool one. It's worth mentioning that this book might feel a bit technical for beginners who aren't familiar with yoga's vocabulary or deeper practices. So if you aren't really aware of subtle energy, or you don't know like a lot of the Sanskrit translations and things like that, there is quite a bit of explanation, but not on everything. And so I do think that like it felt overwhelming to me at first, because even though I had been practicing for a while, I hadn't been studying a lot of like the philosophy, and these Sanskrit terms weren't as familiar to me. And so some of them weren't like, it was assumed that the reader would know, and by like the context clues of what I was reading around, I could sort of like grok what the message was. But because I go back through this book like time and time again, like year after year, and it makes more and more sense to me, just because I'm I'm more couched like this in this languaging, you know what I mean? Like it's something that I'm really familiar with, so I can absorb the material a lot easier because I'm very familiar with the terminology. So I will say that if you feel a little like, wait, what? And you're having to like read the context clues, and sort of feels like a little bit of a foreign language here and there, because it literally is, some of them. Just keep at it, and know that if it's something that you keep studying and you keep kind of surrounding yourself with and absorbing, it will make more and more sense, not just because you're coming back to it, but you're more familiar. So some people have found that the advanced techniques, like the Banda and Mudra sections that I was talking about, that I love so much, have found it to be a little overwhelming if they don't have any prior experience or exposure. So again, it's funny because I love those two sections like the most, but those were the ones that I would just kind of thumb right past when I first got into this title, because those were the things I was least familiar with. So while I do think that a beginner and a new student can definitely like get a once over, you might have to end up doing some more digging on some of these words you don't know. And I did that a lot in this book. I can even see some of the marks that I made little notes next to certain words with like a question mark or something like that. So I would like literally finish reading the sentence and then go look up that word, and then it would like make more sense, right? And then coming back to that same section later, I could understand that a little bit more, and that grew. So while the book is extremely comprehensive, it's also something that you'll grow into over time. It's like, when you were a kid and you like got a new sweater or a jacket or something like that, or shoes for school, and maybe your mom was like, hey, like, let's get a size that's like a little bit big, because I bet you're going to hit a growth spurt before, it gets cold, or in the next couple months, and then, your shoes or your jacket's not going to fit. I don't know if you had that experience, but I did. So yeah, it's just, don't wait to feel like you can understand it to get this book, is what I'm saying. Get it and you'll grow into it. One, I guess, like downside that I could say is that the illustrations are drawings, and there's like these like black and white drawings, and when there's something dynamic like that they're explaining movement wise, they have to kind of make lines and like just to show you like where the direction is going and that kind of thing. And that can be hard because we're so used to our new like graphics. So that can be a little hard, especially if you're like a really visual person, but I don't think it should be something that would prevent you from getting the book. What it lacks in visuals, it makes up for in the absolute richness of its content. So, okay, these are a few book recommendations, and I hope that sparked something within you, got you excited. Maybe you have another book or two that you want to add to your library as you deepen your practice off of the mat, your understanding. Class is about to get started here pretty soon, so I am going to sign off for now. I hope to see some of you if you're listening to this in real time on Sunday at the book swap or for Farron's Harry Potter themed yoga class. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks again for listening in and joining our yoga community. If it so resonates, please share this episode with a friend. Remember, the inner light of awareness within me honors the inner light of awareness within you. Until next time, stay grounded, stay present, and keep flowing with grace.